Hello everybody and welcome back. As always, I am Mateo311 and this is your channel for everything VR related. So today we're going to be talking about the current state of the PlayStation VR2. Now this was a headset I was extremely excited for. I thought we were finally going back to an era of high-end VR gaming, and I even convinced myself that this would help bolster PCVR. Like Sony and Valve were going to work together with exclusive titles and they'd both benefit from it. But a year later, and things aren't looking fantastic. So we're going to break all that down. What's going on? What do I expect for the current 2024 lineup? And where did things go wrong? Now, there are, of course, links and timestamps if you want to skip ahead, but let's just start things off with a look back at the PlayStation VR1 and what the PlayStation VR2 promised us. PlayStation VR2 was supposed to be massive innovation for VR gamers, and the fact that the original PlayStation VR at one point in time was the absolute king of sales in the VR industry, my hopes were pretty high here. I was expecting Sony would once again pull off some of their magic. Originally, I was a PlayStation VR holdout. I just felt like the technology was way too far behind compared to my Valve Index, and the PlayStation 4 couldn't compete with my high-end PC. So honestly, what could Sony ever offer me? But when I finally broke down and bought one, I was impressed by their software. They really knew how to make VR shine. Titles like Astrobot Rescue Mission, Iron Man, and Farpoint were absolutely fantastic, and to this day still remain some of my favorite VR games. They proved that the software was more important than anything else, and this is similar to how the Nintendo Switch has the lowest end hardware compared to all the other consoles, but can still push out some banger titles. So if Sony was already capable of great games with low end hardware and plenty of other hurdles like an external camera and those really terrible controllers, I was convinced they were going to blow our minds when they upgraded the hardware and backed it up with the power of the PlayStation 5. So it looks like things were lining up for success. But let's just take a look back at the progression of VR overall. Originally, the burden of entry was just really high for VR, and that's what held it back. And this actually worked in the PlayStation VR's favor because at that point in time, it was the cheapest way to get into VR. This was prior to the Quest. Now, the Quest made great strides. It lowered the price of getting into VR significantly, but then we had the issue of low-end hardware, so everything became mobile games. So moving back to a PlayStation VR2 was really ideal for someone like me, but not overall for the industry, because we're once again back to the point where the cost of entry is too high. We're also in a position where gamers currently have such high expectations. AAA titles have ballooned up to hundreds of millions of dollars in development costs. This is something that even after 8 years, VR cannot come close to competing with. And when I say doesn't even come close, I mean the VR community doesn't have a fraction of the money that's in the normal gaming industry. So, AAA titles just aren't ideal for VR right now. In order to make it happen, we need to sell a lot more hardware, but we can't sell hardware without there being some big games. And we're in a catch-22. And this is something I was sure that Sony was aware of, and they would give us some amazing first-party games that they would just have to pay for up front. Companies have been doing this forever. They give you an amazing lineup, they even sell their consoles at a loss, just to help get the hardware out there, and then the software sales will make up the difference. But for some reason, they didn't really do this with the PlayStation VR, and that's what we have to discuss. The current lineup of games and the quality of overall games. And I know there's plenty of people like, wait a second, there's tons of great games on the PlayStation VR2. And I wouldn't say tons. There's some really, really high quality games that you can't get anywhere else. But we have to discuss how they're not helping sell the console. And I know another aspect that people talk about is like, well, you don't know the official numbers of what was sold, and you know, you can't make these statements. I have close enough numbers to understand that PlayStation VR2 only development can never come anywhere close to supporting AAA titles, the high-end types of titles we want. And that's why we're getting lots of broken releases or lackluster games. But we'll get back to that. Let's stay on point for a second here. There are absolutely fantastic games like Gran Turismo 7, Resident Evil 8, the Resident Evil 4 remake, No Man's Sky, and Horizon Call of the Mountain available for the PlayStation VR2. The problem with the vast majority of these games is it doesn't incentivize anyone to go out and buy a PlayStation VR2. If you're a PlayStation 5 owner and like these type of games, you most likely bought them already. For someone to go out and spend $500 just to replay these games is very unlikely. Even if all of their friends, family, and the media was hyping it up, $500 is still a really big ask. On top of that, there's only roughly 50 million PlayStation 5 owners out there, so the people willing to go out and buy a headset is already much smaller than something like the Quest 3. So if Sony really wants to grow their VR market share, they have to appeal to the gamers that don't have any VR at all and justify the fact that their hardware is going to be 1,000 or more versus the Quest 3, which is only 500. So how do they justify that their hardware is twice as good? Now you could say, well, you're also getting an excellent console, but from a media standpoint, it doesn't look like Sony's doing much at all. We expected there'd be a really big holiday push, but that really didn't happen. So what's going on? Well, it looks like they're kind of cutting their losses, something that it looks like every other studio is also doing with the development of their PlayStation VR2 games, which is something I mentioned, the botched launches that we keep seeing. Now we know that PCVR has been treated like the redhead stepchild for some time now, but even Steam VR is getting better releases than the PlayStation VR2 lately. Just today, Bulletstorm VR released, and it's not looking good at all. The absolutely fantastic Vertigo 2 also struggled with its release, and even titles like Arizona Sunshine 2, which had a fairly decent release, still felt like the PSVR2 version was the least polished of them all. At least that's in my opinion. I felt like the game's reprojection was rough, and the gun handling definitely felt worse than other platforms. The studio First Contact Entertainment recently announced that they're shutting down due to lack of support for VR inside of the industry. Now, they were known for making Firewall Zero on the PlayStation VR1 and more recently Firewall Ultra, which basically went up in smoke. It was a rough launch and it just didn't feel like a VR title. Now, as the game was approaching release, I'm sure the studio knew they were headed towards a brick wall. They bet too hard on the success of the PlayStation VR2, and based on the limited number of hardware sales, they most likely knew this title would not be a financial success. And this is something I assume every other studio is doing right now. They say, hey, listen, the potential amount of money we can make on the PlayStation VR2 is X. So we are only dedicating Y to the development and polishing of our release on this platform. And that's why, time and time again, we keep getting a really crap release on the PlayStation VR2. It's developers cutting their losses. Now, I could be totally wrong here. There could be something about the PlayStation VR2 that just makes it so much harder to program for or causes so many other issues compared to PC and Quest, but I don't really think that's the case. I think the true case here is money, because that's usually what pushes the industry. There's people making these decisions, and at the end of the day, if you want to be a successful company, you want to be a successful studio, you need to make a profit. So you have to cut your losses at some point. And it looks like the PlayStation VR2 is forcing these studios to cut their losses. Now, I know I'm coming off all doom and gloom, going down really hard on the PlayStation VR2. If you have one and you're enjoying it, that is fantastic. Enjoy it. Like I said, there are some great experiences that you could only get on that platform. But what I want is for VR to grow as much as possible. I do want the PlayStation VR to be super successful because I love the games that Sony puts out. They have the best high-end titles, and I'm talking about primarily the PlayStation 5, but they have some of the best high-end VR titles too, and I want that to continue. So I'm not giving up hope yet. I've said it before, I feel like 2024 is their make it or break it year. Sony's either going to say, whatever, we give up, we don't care, third-party developers can support this if they want, good, make your game, which I hope they don't do, or they say, listen, if we want this product to be viable, we want it to grow, we want it to continue, we have to invest in it. And let's get some of our big IPs, our big studios, let's give them some money, and let's make some freaking awesome VR games. I'm sorry, but everybody knows that God of War in VR would just be pure magic. The mechanics would work fantastically. Like, I always think about it. Reach behind my back, there's my axe, throw it and pull it back. That's a mechanic that works fantastic in VR. Squeeze your hand when you have the ring and the spear comes up. I mean, it makes sense. And who doesn't want to whip around those chains? It could be, you know, a roguelite like they just released, Valhalla, something like that. I understand they can't go triple A full end because they're going to lose too much money, but they could give us something like that. Great core mechanics, great graphics, and experience we can't get anywhere else, and we will eat it up. So hopefully 2024 is the year of PlayStation VR2, but after the previous year, I'm trying not to get my hopes up. I've been let down too many times. I used to get all excited for anything HTC does, and look where that got me. So, Sony, please don't let me down. Work together with Valve, you know, pull together, come out with some awesome titles, make everybody happy, and let's, you know, just watch VR grow. And that was today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, go ahead and give me a thumbs up. I'm sure a bunch of people are going to be pissed, so let me know what you think down in the comments. If you're new here, consider subscribing. And as always, I'll see you guys on next time.